So actually my talk, I'm a designer. I'm not a neuroscientist. And I'm not really an AI guy, although I have a degree in AI. And my name of my talk, which we'll hopefully will get in a second here, is Multimodal Wearable Personal Assistants and Team Assistants. But believe it or not, it's actually going to be kind of a vision talk. It's not going to be commercial talk that much. I'll be speaking about, all right. So we didn't get our spider, right? Oh, we forget about spider. I had the Clinotis severus, which looks beautiful, and and his body and his eyes, all it says about I was designed to jump. So the talk will be about locomotion. Multimodal wearable personal assistants, basically I said, my talk will have three parts. First I will discuss why I didn't choose AI for my design. Then I will describe what part, it's a very different way of neuroscience I have selected for embodied design. And the last part will be actually commercial technology and how it could be implemented in a real product. So this market for personal assistants is a $100 billion market. I was at Microsoft 4 or 5 years ago, and at that time at Microsoft nobody wanted to build the personal assistants. I had a really hard time to get my message across. But today Bill Gates is in charge of Microsoft Personal Assistant. So the times have changed quite a bit, but it just so happens that Doug Leonard, CYC, and Apple famous Siri, they don't work. So I would say that AI did not really has a record of some overwhelming successes. So why is that? And I just added the last sentence, which is the Combat Operations Center, because I thought that I'm not Sandia, and there will be a slide about that. Although these main technologies are for consumer product. This came out last week in a VentureBeat. Microsoft researchers say the newest deep learning system beats humans and Google. It turns out that on the images you see, this I got it from the paper, that the Microsoft system only makes 4.9% errors, while the humans make 5.1. So on the surface, it would seem that indeed, Ray Kurzweil was right. We are blending the supernatural intelligent AI technology is approaching human levels. But just look at the data. Look at the data. These three on the left are examples of correct classifications. And I don't know how many of you would know that this image on the left is a commander. I didn't know. And the image next to it is yellow lady slipper. And the authors of the paper are very proud of that. They were able to identify a specific species of an animal. They said that humans only would find a dog or a flower. But there is the strength of human recognition, that we can create abstract things. And more important part is the context. There is no context in Microsoft data set. They use 1.2 million images with 1,000 categories. Now, whoever created these categories was a human being, very peculiar human being, because on this third image, which you see, they classified that image as a sunscreen. Now, other people could reasonably come up with different classifications. So, as a matter of fact, I classified the image as a portrait of a young artist, a portrait of an artist as a young woman, which seems like a little bit more arbitrarily than a sunscreen, but unless you read James Joyce, right? So there is no limit to human categories, and this particular category is the two examples on the right, which are actually unsuccessful, are Spotlight and a restaurant. And the software very reasonably actually selected acoustic guitar and a play. That's what I would do. So bottom line is, this software has no concept of meaning whatsoever. In fact, that classification scheme looks to me like Borges created the classification scheme, which I have here on a paper. I'll read it briefly, very quickly. It's called, you probably will be familiar with it, Celestial Emporium of Benevolent Knowledge. And he classified animals into 14 categories, including those who belong to the emperor, embalmment was those that are trained suckling pigs, mermaids, fabulous ones, stray dogs, those that are included in this classification, those that tremble as if they were mad, etc., etc. So basically any kind of classification is based on human purpose. It depends whether you're sitting in a restaurant and you're looking for food, that you would classify that image as something else like that. So bottom line is, this is useless as far as I'm concerned. So now, what are the problems with AI in creating an intelligent or actually useful personal assistant? And the biggest one I can think of, which you would never probably expect, is a Cartesian dualism. René Descartes, 400 years ago, came up with this separation of body and mind, which translates to separation of brain and mind. And of course, everybody thinks the structures, the reason that the classification was actually pushed by Microsoft and other Google and all other people, because they believe these taxonomies, they reside in the real world. So, and since they're all mathematicians, starting with René Descartes, then they like to think about mathematics as in the realm of mind. And that translates to the programmers, yeah, and the computers are, in fact, you probably couldn't insult mathematicians more than telling them that their science was originally created in agriculture and accounting. They would take it as a real serious insult. So they came up with the concept of this embodied intellect, which reduces thinking to a simple manipulation. That is not what the brain does. There was a case when Richard Feynman become famous. There was an interview, a historian was interviewing Richard Feynman about his life, and he was talking about a particular discovery he made. And the historian asked him a question, so how did you invent this? And he said, I did the equations on a paper. And the historian says, no, surely you have done the discovery in your brain, and then you just wrote it down on a paper. And Richard Feynman answered very intelligent, interesting way. He said, no, I did it on paper. You use paper and pencil, that's what you do. And basically the story for this is that representations do not exist in human mind. They exist in computers, and they exist on paper. So now two other problems, which I'll have a separate slide, is the fact that the deep learning networks and any kind of networks, circuits, are static. And finally, I'm going to claim that AI people are very simplistic view of human cognition. The Ilya Prigogine, I think is Russian, so that would be acceptable spelling. He said the triumph, quote unquote, of modern science, the elimination of time. And I'm going to claim here that deep learning structures, which reside, to me, very superficially perhaps, resemble a Hebbian learning network, right? It's a static network. You know, you grow the neurons, you create the connections, and you put in a weights, but time is outside. Time is brought to the system externally. And the picture in the middle is a very famous picture. You see it everywhere on the web. And I ran into this picture. It was on a chest of another Ilya Suskever, who is a member of research group at Google Brain. And I hate that image. So I woke up to him and I said, well, you know, maybe brain doesn't look like that. Are you sure that this what the brain is like a computer? And I said, absolutely, I'm sure. And then I was kind of trying to push my luck, and I said, well, maybe you should read some neuroscience. And he reacted magnificently. He said, absolutely, I'm not going to read neuroscience because that would be a total waste of time. And that was the same exact answer I have found in Microsoft, in a computer vision at Microsoft and a natural language group. These people believe that the neuroscience of a human brain actually would limit the scope of intellect. And they would rather like to extract the essence of intellect, just like the devil removed the shadow from Schlemiel. And of course build it in whatever substrate, silicon, and it's not so simple. So time cannot be, in a living being, time is an integral part of our behavior. And those two graphs on the right, on your right, are fields. Dynamic fields. And I have to thank Igor, because I never in my life I would expect that I wouldn't have to actually argue there is such a thing as a dynamic view of brain. And unlike the quantum mechanics, which I don't not use, I use Carver-Mead's point of view, which basically, in his view, there is no duality between particles and waves. Electron is just a wave. And you start from that up. You build up coherent waves, which are like a laser. Laser is a coherent light, right? Now, von Neumann and Heisenberg categorically denied that such a thing is possible until the day the guy who invented laser showed it to them. So we are living this Cartesian dualism, and dynamic view of organisms is not really a prevalent one, but it's very important. If you look at another legacy of quantum mechanics, is the Bohr model of atom is like a miniature solar system. I mean, it's kind of ridiculous in 2015 that we would, and go Google, any kind of atoms. I got these from Google search. And, all right, why should the atom resemble a solar system? And why should the photon, a kind of like a bouncing bullet, a particle? The question is, what does it have to do with neurons, right? The benzene ring in the middle, again, it's depicted as a beautiful solid structure, right? Particles, the bonds look like cylinders. Now, it turns out that there is a problem with this representation, and it's actually more like a fairy tale rather than a true representation of benzene ring. In reality, the electrons on carbons oscillate. So you have oscillations of course, on electrons. Then you have oscillations on benzene ring. Now, why is the benzene ring important? It's essential element of all neuromodulators. Dopamine looks like that with a few little other things. Serotonin, all the neuromodulators. And neuromodulators are not connected synaptically to the neocortex. So that is very interesting. Now, the more interesting is that you take 32 of these and you get tubulin. Now, tubulin is a protein which also resonates, but more importantly, if you stack them up, you get microtubules. And microtubules is a cytoskeleton of every cell in a human body, including neurons. And you might have not known, but the hillock, which is where the ion channels are, which cause the synaptic, the action potential, are completely controlled by the configuration of microtubules. Now, so what I'm getting at is that neuron is a very complicated thing. Colin Hales, this last picture on here is a Colin Hales from the University of Melbourne, decided that what he's going to do, he's going to model ion channels as E-fields. And what you see in the first one is basically a thalamic neuron of a rat, very well documented from the public database, and it has about 20,000 of ion channels. You see them as a little these purple dots. And he blew up the entire supercomputer budget of his department for a whole year in simulating 25 milliseconds after the action potential arrived. And what he saw is that at about 12.3 millisecond time, there was a giant rotating E field, a boson, which rotated throughout not only this neuron, but overlapped 50,000 neighboring neurons. Now, do you think it's a possibility, these E fields, and Carver-Mead is very clear about that. Electric dipoles couple 1 million times stronger than magnetic dipoles. So there is maybe a possibility that this influences the way the neuron function. Now, I surely hope that, by the way, Eugene Izhikevich did the same thing in 13 floating points. So maybe there is something in the middle which we can find, and we will get closer to the more realistic neuron. So now, I'm going to have to go faster. So basically, the area of cognition is simplistic. the neurons do not just integrate and fire. They are more like a Stradivari violin. That statement was done by Georgi Buzaki in his book Rhythm of the Brain, which I highly recommend. It's an incredible work. So they're very, very complex resonators. They're built from microtubules and ion fields. And then brain is built from the Stradivari violins, 200 billion of them, with 100 trillion plus synapses. So brain also may be a dynamic structure, more like a pot of boiling water than nice, beautiful semiconductor circuit. So, and next level is that neocortex is useless without hippocampus storing memories in it. And hippocampus is useless if it's not a part of locomoting body. Because, and I'll get to the next slide. So, and finally, environment, a body needs a ground to walk upon because these are open systems. Body and brain, all systems, there is no equilibrium. These are far from equilibrium systems. So basically, you have to have a boots on the ground if you want to create a real intellect, which is the animal intellect. And AI is more like carpet bombing from 20,000 feet. This one I just skip. I realize this particular one will bring you, some of you maybe a little bit of discomfort, but the point of this slide is that, and I believe every single one of them, I realize it might be different than what most of you believe, but the point of this, all these three things, representation, symbolic computation, information processing, are part of computer. So what I'm saying is maybe there is something that humankind is really motivated to take the leading technology and imagine the humans are like it. By the way, 400 years ago, that was mechanical marionettes, and René Descartes was really into that. So we moved from a mechanical model to an electronic model, which I believe is just as inaccurate. So what is the alternative? We don't have representation. We couple very, very tightly sensors with motor actions. That's the answer. If you look at the research in speech, what is the first thing that natural language processing people do? They jettison gestures. Gestures are part of speech, cannot be separated. When I say bring this here, there is pronouns are grounded in three-dimensional situation. You have to walk and grasp and bring and recognize where it is. All of that is thrown away in natural language processing, which is symbolically based. Same thing is true about vision. My colleagues at MSR, they were trying to recognize the chair from just one bitmap. Now, they may be able to do that, but it's not how human vision works. Okay? Human vision is motor-driven, and the largest density of sensors is in oculus muscles. And when you look at it something, you already know how to reach it, if it's close enough, if it's in peripersonal space. So this is a very interesting way and a very, very fruitful way, I believe. And I have derived from these three design principles. One is that brains evolve for motor control. And as a matter of fact, all the sensor rods and cones and the lateral organs, the cochlea, all of these are evolved from the little flagella, like a sperm moving around. It's a motor organ which was originally a separate animal, and now they turn into sensors. And the cladogram on the right shows you the evolution of a brain in a vertebrae. Now, I personally am not very excited about lamprey. It doesn't really have a skeleton, but it's a vertebrae. What it doesn't have is cerebellum, because it doesn't have any skeleton, right? So the control on lamprey is entirely done by optical tectum. And as the animals get out of the water into the mud, like amphibians, they get a little bit of cerebellum. Then reptiles get a bigger one. And finally, mammals and birds and bony fish get a really big cerebellum and a bigger cortex. And the single most important evolutionary element between reptiles and mammals is that the hippocampus, not the hippocampus, basal ganglia don't go to the cerebellum, but they go to the cortex. So they basically, the whole great sign of the human intelligence is that we can suppress the action and maybe survive a little longer. All right. So this slide is basically says it goes to the oscillations, to the fields. Phase precession is well, actually I have to skip phase precession, but there is no symbolic time code in the hippocampus. All right? The phase of the theta oscillation determines the position of the organisms in an environment. And there is a gain control mechanism, so it works really beautiful. And unlike the O'Keefe and Moser, who got Nobel Prize this year for this work, and it's a great work, basically I don't believe that cognitive maps is the result. I believe that hippocampus more creates like a multimodal story of our life, and memories. And memories are not the representation, they are subjective to what we do. So this is actually also a very important slide, but I'm just going to say that I believe that brain is a dynamic field which creates amplitude modulated spatial fields which emerge during very fast but continuous nonlinear phase transitions. And this is the work already started with basically actually Gerald Edelman, who got Nobel Prize, but it was really perfected by Walter Freeman, who actually added the Georgi Bouzakis oscillation to the mix, and they created a theory of global theory of how the brain works, which I would highly recommend that we would look at it. So now the last part, I think, can I have like 2 more minutes? All right. Wearable sensors are everywhere, right? The Sergey is wearing this already discontinued product, but they have a new one, Magic Leap is coming. And remarkably, Microsoft has a very innovative product in HoloLens. I'm surprised, it says, but there's 18 sensors in there. Now, what is remarkable about Apple Watch, they have 1 sensor, okay? They used to have 4, but 3 of them didn't work, so they took it out. And yet Tim Cook believes that he's going to bet his company on this wonderful piece of jewelry, which I don't think many people will buy. But these sensors, the sensors basically are all over the body, and so they're not just scaled-down PCs. They're not computing elements. They are embodied. And this is what the Embodied Corporation does, which is the only thing I want to mention is that using the field-based neural technology to correlate multiple modality in real time. And we build out of these motor categories, we build a ontology which is unique to every user. It's based on his behavior over time. It is different from Google Knowledge Graph in fundamental ways. And so I think this is actually pretty much the last slide is that because there are no circuits in these resonators to be building, it seems like it would be a very good idea. It would be not very hard to expand the grasping of the motor action of single individuals to expand it to a whole fighting unit. So you could have a software residing in a cloud working on a CLC level, which would basically find a correlation between visual sensation of one soldier and audio sensation of another one. And literally, I believe with this technology, we could turn a squad into a symbiotic organism. And so in 400 years, we went from this to this, and we really need chaotic attractors. That's a double scroll attractor, which can be created with a circuit. And this is a funding slide, is that I think more money should be put into that instead of AI. Thank you. Questions? All right. Thank you. Oh, there's a question.
Hello? Oh, cool. I just wanted to say Kant would probably agree with you that time is a dependent thing for any living being to interpret its world. So from you mentioning Descartes and his dualism made me think about that as well. It's not really a question, sorry.
What? I'm sorry.
It's not really a question. I can talk to you afterwards.
All right, let's talk.
Thank you.
Maybe offline discussion. Thank you.
All right.